Ukraine's president appears to have failed in convincing the United States to supply Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Volodymyr Zelensky reiterating his desire for the weapons when he met with President Donald Trump for the third time this year at the White House. Donald Trump saying he fears the donation of weapons would escalate the war further. Sean Bell has more details looking at what the repercussions could be for Ukraine.
The President Zelensky's visit to Washington was probably not as successful as he might have liked, but it is worth setting a little bit of context to the war. There is over 800 miles of front line in this war between Russia and Ukraine, and the fighting has been intense all the way along it. But although it was expected to be a very difficult summer for Ukraine, in reality, the front line hasn't moved significantly this summer. But Russia is on the front foot and it is advancing. Where Ukraine has made definite gains is by attacking Russian energy infrastructure deeper inside Russia itself by using some of the long-range weapons. And that has created fuel shortages and also undermined Russia's exporting of oil opportunities. The challenge, of course, as you can see from the yellow line here, is that the range of the weapons is relatively limited. What long-range weapons would provide is Ukraine a chance to target significantly more of the Russian energy infrastructure, and that's why they wanted the Tomahawk missiles. Unfortunately, very early on in the meeting yesterday, President Trump clearly took the Tomahawks off the table. He also proposed that there was going to be a freeze on the front line. That might suit President Trump, might also suit President Zelensky, but it's quite clear that President Putin has no intention of stopping the war anytime soon. It's also pretty clear that Trump believes that President Putin is ready to end the war, despite the lack of any evidence to back that up. So for the time being, the Tomahawks are off the table, at least for now. Of course, all of this follows a 2.5-hour telephone conversation between President Trump and President Putin earlier on in the week. And the outcome from that was a further meeting between the two leaders. It's very difficult to know why that was agreed, given the abject failure of most of the meetings up to now, particularly the one in Alaska, where despite the warm words from President Putin, there were clearly no actions that followed from that. So why is Trump taking this strategy? One of the reasons he's doing that is he's a negotiator. He wants to get leverage. What he's actually got with leverage at the moment is it's clear that President Putin is worried about the prospects of these missiles being given to Ukraine. He's worried about the impact that will have on his energy and oil infrastructure. Therefore, it prompted him to call President Trump. That's why he's not put them on the table, but it means that he's found a pain point for President Putin and therefore a negotiating opportunity. Of course, the big problem is the venue that they've chosen for these talks. That is Hungary. The risk here is it hands a massive PR opportunity to President Putin. Firstly, this is going to be Putin landing on European soil. All the surrounding countries are signatories to the ICC, who have issued an arrest warrant for President Putin. Clearly, and also Viktor Orban, as seen here, is a key friend of President Putin. There will be a genuine warm welcome and a red carpet rolled out. So unless President Trump can actually end up putting some keen deadlines and ultimatums on the table, President Putin will walk away from these troops emboldened. So will it work? Well, Trump and Zelensky clearly want to find an end to the war, but President Putin is not going to stop until he achieves his objectives or he's forced to stop, whether militarily or economically. And this is where the big difference between Zelensky and Trump becomes apparent. President Zelensky believes that he's got to force President Putin to the negotiating table. That's why he wants Tomahawk missiles. Whereas President Trump believes that might risk escalation. He wants to give negotiation a chance, despite the fact there's no evidence that that is achieving any sort of success. And that, of course, the irony of all of this is the longer they try negotiations, the more President Putin prolongs the war, and therefore Trump prolongs a war that actually he's trying to end.